FaithWorks Live. And because if you weren't, it'd be awful lonely around here. Rebecca Haynie is my name, and it's just a joy to be with you, looking at what our faith looks like, to live it out in the here and now. I believe we're created for just such a time as this. And it's a wonderful time to celebrate. We're rocking in the free world here, and we love our country. We love our nation, specifically because of those, the way that our founders enshrined those God-given freedoms and recognized them first and foremost, and then protected them and said, you know what, actually, we're upending this idea that we've held for centuries that rights come from kings and we're at the mercy of a king's good graces. No, actually, God gives every individual those rights. We're created with them from our beginning, and it's government's job to protect those and definitely not to oppress or to usurp them. And so that's how we're going to be here in America. And it's been working pretty well for us for the last couple centuries. Although I will say we now face, I would say, unprecedented attacks on some of those very basic freedoms. And of course, around here, very passionate about the freedom to speak. It's hard to imagine a free nation without the guarantee of the freedom of speech, the freedom of thought, the freedom to express your thoughts, even clumsily, in the public square. And without that, I don't think you have really any freedom to speak of whatsoever. And into this fray, I would say that one place that I've always thought would be, absolutely perfect in terms of the educational system, we need to be challenged. We need to think well and to understand other points of view very well. And a program that's done that is through speech, through debate, through competition, that educates and trains young minds. And I would say minds of any age need to have these skills. Unfortunately, I would say the woke mob is not going to let that stand without a fight, and freedom of speech isn't so free, even in speech and debate these days. And someone who knows a great deal about that is our distinguished guest today. James Fishback is our guest. He is the founder and director of Incubate Debate. It's based in Florida. He is an accomplished debate competitor in his own right. And he took that love and said, we're going to expand this and make sure kids from all ages, from all backgrounds, so it's high school and college, I believe, and we're going to open this up and to provide opportunities for kids to learn these ultra valuable skills. And so he's sounding the alarm bell as to some of the attacks on freedom of speech that are occurring right here in this space. James, it's wonderful to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Rebecca. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Of course. Well, and this is something that I'm passionate about. You may know that I like to talk a little bit, but it's good to know of what we speak, and in particular, to be able to consider that point of view from other aspects, to listen to pros and cons, to listen to a variety of viewpoints, and then truly be educated and perhaps change your mind on some of these very important issues. That's always a possibility. And I know that this is personal for you as well.
It absolutely is. I did high school debate for 4 years, 2009 to 2013, an interesting time in our country. It changed my life. It helped me overcome a really bad childhood stutter that would come and go and then come again. And I had a passion for economics, for foreign affairs, for the Constitution, for the ideas that set this country into motion nearly 250 years ago. And outside of going to a diner with my dad and my grandfather and talking about these things, I didn't really have an outlet to do that, to really express. And high school debate ended up being the perfect way to do that. Going to tournaments every couple of weeks and having debates about current events or timeless issues like freedom of speech or the Second Amendment or federalism was just an incredible way to not just challenge the beliefs that I had, but to walk away with even stronger convictions and really making me think in the process. And I came back from high school debate, went to college, and I came back to the event because it had given me so much. I wanted to play just a small role in giving back. And I did that as a volunteer debate coach at a low-income high school in Miami. I grew up in South Florida. And Rebecca, when I came back to high school debate, this activity that had transformed my life had transformed into something that I barely recognized. Certain words meant you automatically lost. Certain arguments were not given the time of day. Arguments that were held to a much higher standard were the conservative ones, and arguments that were just argued with really no evidence, logic, or reasoning, the progressive arguments were given a free pass. So it was a deeply unfair system. And the great irony of all of this, as you pointed out, is you would think this is the last place in the world that the adults in the room, the so-called adults in the room, would put their thumb on the scale and say certain arguments have no place here, and as a result would declare war on them and censor them. And that's what's been so troubling. I wrote 2 stories about this for the Free Press, which is founded by Barry Weiss, entitled "At High School Debates, Debate is No Longer Allowed," and then part 2, "At High School Debates, Watch What You Say." This is a really, really important issue, not just for students who do high school debate today, which is about 140,000 according to the National Speech and Debate Association, but also for the nearly 2 million American men and women who have gone through this program. It was known as the National Forensics League. It's actually based in Des Moines, Iowa, and have gone through this program over the past nearly 100 years. This is such a big, big issue. We just got to talk about it. I'm so grateful that you're having me on to do that.
Shout out to Des Moines, and we can hopefully play a small role in righting some of the attacks that are happening here. It is concerning, as someone that, as I've said, I participated in some of those events. My husband was a champion debater, and lo and behold, we got married. So you know how interesting that's going to be around our kitchen table. But that's so concerning to hear that in particular that certain words, for example, are not even allowed to be used because, I mean, not to get too Orwellian right off the bat, but if you lose the capacity, whoever has the ability to control the language will ultimately win the argument, and it even
right.
Disables us from being able to think outside of those controlled boxes. So could you give us some examples of some of the perhaps more egregious instances of this?
I absolutely will. Let me first start by saying that the National Speech and Debate Association has a website called Tabroom. Tabroom is where judges post their statements. They share their profiles, their statements with students before the debate round. Now, when I was in high school, these paradigms would say things like, "Don't speak too fast," or "I really like arguments that use primary, not secondary source evidence," or "I really like arguments that have great impacts," which is to say, explain to me why your argument matters in the context of the round. Those are perfectly fine. Those are procedural. They're apolitical. They have nothing to do with one ideology or one political view. But something changed, Rebecca. When I left high school debate, there was some progressive ideas, but nothing that's censorship that prevented things from being said. When I came back, these paradigms became riddled with political and ideological statements. They more closely resembled the Twitter bio of a political social activist than a so-called impartial adjudicator of a Saturday debate tournament. Here's what one judge tells students in their paradigm before the round. This is what students read before the round to get a better idea of their judge's expectations. I'm reading verbatim here. "Before anything else, including being a debate judge, I am a Marxist, Leninist, Maoist. I cannot check the revolutionary proletarian science at the door. I will no longer evaluate and thus ever vote for rightist, capitalist, imperialist arguments and positions. Examples of these include capitalism good, defense of the U.S., Zionism or normalizing Israel, U.S. white fascist policing." Rebecca, how does the young 14-year-old girl from Des Moines feel to walk into a round? She spent all week with mom and dad getting ready. She has this great argument how we need to increase police funding so we can put an end to the senseless violence that's afflicting communities like Baltimore, D.C., and Chicago. And she walks into a round and she sees this judge who says to her, "If you argue that policing is good, I will not vote for you."
It's utterly ridiculous. I mean, it's self-defeating in the extreme. I mean, how can we're not even allowed to defend one of those was U.S. defense of the United States. Defense in itself is now considered problematic, to use the leftist favorite phrase. It's hard to think of a word that is more self-defeating, an idea that is more self-defeating than someone who is so closed to, who made that person a judge would be my next question, because they're so closed to understanding different perspectives to even be able to fairly consider it. It's one thing to disagree. That's just fine. But the whole concept of debate is that you might, find yourself defending a position that you may or may not personally find compelling, but you're to make the strongest case possible for that
Correct.
point of view. And for a judge to then say, no, I'm not going to tolerate that against my own ideas, they are ironically presenting the antithesis, the problem that speech and debate is supposed to help at least address, is supposed to help us avoid that fallacious type of thinking.
That's exactly right. And why this individual would continue to judge, who's judged, by the way, hundreds of students over the last 2 years, why they would be continuing to judge is just beyond me. The National Speech and Debate Association put out a 2-page statement after my article came out, which has been read nearly 2 million times, and I'm humbled and honored to say that. Their statement said a lot, Rebecca, but here's what it didn't say or do. It didn't condemn, it didn't denounce, it didn't remove the types of judges that I brought up who clearly violate the National Speech and Debate Association's rules. Let's read what those rules are so we know exactly what we are talking about. The National Speech and Debate Association says that judges should decide the round as it's debated, not based on their personal beliefs. So when a debate judge named Shabam Gupta in his paradigm tells students before the debate, quote, if you are discussing immigrants in a round and describe the person as illegal, I will immediately stop the round, give you the loss, give you a stern lecture, and then talk to your coach. I will not have you making the debate space unsafe. He is automatically disqualifying and then humiliating a young girl or boy for using a term that isn't just ubiquitous in media and politics, Rebecca. Sorry to say, it's accurate.
Exactly.
It is illegal immigration. When you break the law, you are doing something illegal. When you break immigration laws, you are doing something illegal. We can have a debate about whether we should secure the southern border, whether we should deploy the military, whether we should build a wall or not. We can have reasonable arguments on both sides. But for an adult to stand up and to yell at a 14-year-old girl, to interrupt her, to give her the loss, to lecture, humiliate, ostracize, marginalize her because she used the term illegal immigration, that just isn't antithetical to debate, Rebecca. It is profoundly un-American.
I would agree wholeheartedly and amen. And again, there's this idea of shutting down debate with which we disagree. It prevents even having open discussion, even being able to educate yourself on where somebody else might think. And we talk about this on a large scale as far as why our society is devolving and this rapid slouch towards Gomorrah that we've been seeing. I mean, there's really no such thing as a slippery slope. I think we're down at the boggy bottom at this point. But at the same time, this is a microcosm to which I think is like sportscasters' favorite words. My husband really likes to watch sports, and they use the word microcosm all the time. So forgive me, but I'll use it now. Of what's happening in society writ large. We're no longer able to debate well with one another or to consider other points of view or the strength of one side's evidence versus another side. We just start hurling epithets at one another. And the moment that somebody says our trigger word, it's not safe anymore. And we have to run away screaming from the room and or cancel any opposition. And that is so troubling that that's happening here. What that judge said, for example, about the debate space needing to be safe. It's not supposed to be safe, quote unquote. No. Number one, words aren't violence. Speech is not violence. So I don't think anyone's unsafe in that room. Let's just be honest. But it's not supposed to be safe in the context of refusing to challenge any of those preconceptions. It's actually supposed to be free.
That's exactly right. And we can't let them, Rebecca, hijack this word safety. Look, I'm all for safety. Okay. I'm for the safety of the residents of Chicago, Baltimore, and DC who are getting gunned down in the streets because progressive DAs are letting criminals get out of jail free cards. The 9 out of 10 homicide victims in the District of Columbia who are African-American men, let's talk about their safety. But don't throw that word around when we're having a reasonable civil discussion about what's happening at the southern border or President Trump's track record. Here's the reality of the situation, Rebecca. This obsession with safety conceals a disdain for anything that these people deem unsafe, anything they don't like. At the 2019 National Speech and Debate Association Championship Tournament, the national tournament, here is what the tournament parliamentarian told students before the debate began. He said, quote, "I don't want to hear Mr. or Miss from anyone. That would be greatly appreciated as we try to respect the differences of every single person here." I asked him for follow-up. I asked him for request for comment. He told me his warning was, quote, "in direct alignment with the spirit of equity and inclusion that the NSDA promotes. They're declaring war on gendered language. If you refer to Rebecca as Miss Haynie, if you refer to James as Mr. Fishback, you are being violent. You will be penalized and you will be censored." What is up with that?
Well, and it's the height of I would say self-owning. It's just basically it is where we are right now. It's the perfect example, again, microcosm of where we are, that words that were designed to convey respect, those honorifics, to say Mr. Fishbach, that's a sign of respect.
Yes.
And now it's considered a threat. It's considered a problem. It's just so ridiculous. How on earth could we have thoughtful debates if we can't even use these terms or define them? I mean, the most popular documentary of our time is What is a Woman, that asks this very same question, and that's deemed so threatening that we can't talk about it. Almost couldn't even have it on Twitter. Just that types of things should ever be off limits. I don't think that anything is so dangerous that it shouldn't be allowed to be debated. I'm a big proponent of people being able to think well, even about things with which they disagree. How on earth are we supposed to be able to think well if we can't even speak the words? And that is why I would agree that the concern about censorship, I think there's a lot of Christians that may or may not understand why this is such a big issue for me, and why I can stand side by side with people who disagree with me about many things, theological, political, etc., as long as we can stand for the freedom of speech and stand against the censorship of our language. And I wonder do you see any examples of this this closed-mindedness? I'll just say these verboten words coming from the conservative camp. Have you seen conservative-leaning judges rather that would say, "Oh, I'm not going to allow these certain words to be uttered in my presence. I'm going to immediately stop the round, and I will, refuse to dignify. I'll lecture you if you use any, such an alternative pronoun, for example."
No, they do not exist. They do not exist. And so what people will say, and let's just put ourselves in the other shoes and let's just kind of steelman. If somebody were actually a conservative, were telling students before the round, if you argue for open borders or for defunding the police, you're going to automatically lose, no questions asked. That is abhorrent. That is not free speech. And I would be just as against that and just as vocal, Rebecca, about that as I am with what's happening here. But let's be honest, what's happening here is far left progressives. And this is not about their ideology. It's simply about the action of censorship, are censoring young men and women who came to high school debate for an educational competition. They didn't come here to get lectured and indoctrinated. That is not what high school debate is about. Look, if you want to go to the high school Republicans or the high school Democrat clubs and you want to have partisan ideology conversation, by all means do that. But don't call yourself the National Speech and Debate Association. Don't call yourself a high school debate tournament. And the second that Trojan horse busts through the gate, what jumps out? Critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion, safe space over sacred space, and the idea that hate speech needs to be stamped out. As people of faith, as Christians, I think we can relate a lot to the importance of what it means to be able to speak freely and use our voices. I think about kind of Proverbs 18:21. Death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruits. There's so much power there. The idea that our voices can be used to persuade, can be used to persuade people to get off the ledge, to take that leap of faith, to start a new country, to end slavery. All of these different ideas happen through the power of tongue, the power of persuasion. And here's my fear. This is not about high school debate. This is not about what happens at a tournament. This is about the ultimate idea that an attack on free speech anywhere is an attack on free speech everywhere. What we are seeing, the same dynamics that are playing out at high school debate tournaments all across the country are playing out in social media circles, are playing out in the workplace, are playing out in college education, are playing out in K through 12. And that's fundamentally what this is about, is open debate and free speech made this country great. And they are under attack like never before. And so, for lack of a better word, we have got to make debate great again.
I would agree. Can we take a quick break and we'll come back with a couple of other follow-ups to that? James Fishback, our excellent guest, check out his work. He's the founder and director of Incubate Debate, which I think is a wonderful program. We'd love to see that emulated all across the nation, to help expand and open up opportunities for kids, for students to debate and learn to think and speak well. That's a skill that I would love to make great again. It is disturbing what it is we're seeing happen in this space, in the speech and debate competitions that are happening across the country and the censorship that's taking place there. But I'd love to know, what can we do to right that? What can we do to start encouraging the openness and freedom of speech, freedom of debate again? And I think there's no better time than now to talk about that. So we'll get James' thoughts on that when we return. You're listening to FaithWorks Live. In today's world, security has never been more vital. And at FaithWorks Live, we're proud to partner with VeriGuard Security. It's a professional physical security service, and they're really raising the bar in security and private investigations. Whether you need a team of professional officers to protect what you have worked hard to build, or their mobile security units for multiple properties or large locations, from business or corporate properties to your home or neighborhood. Perhaps you've got an event coming up. They secure quality security coverage for events large and small, because it's about peace of mind and protecting you, your family, your team, and your property. Settle for nothing less than the best when it comes to your security. You shouldn't have to compromise. When it comes to security, you can trust VeriGuard. Contact them today at verigard.us. That's VARA guard.us. For security service you can trust VeriGuard. There's no better time than now to stand for life, and you can stand with Iowa's original pro-life organization, Pulse for Life. They're the longest-standing nonprofit pro-life organization in Iowa, and they are dedicated to informing, educating, and inspiring a new generation to value the sanctity of all human life, from fertilization until natural death. They serve at the State House. They educate in classrooms, at events. They proudly serve on the coalition of pro-life leaders. They are on the front lines of the battle against this throwaway culture of death that we see all around us, and we are winning ground. Hearts and minds are changing, and the pro-life movement is continuing to grow. And you can be a part of the exciting things that are happening right here in our own backyard at pulseforlife.org, and get your finger on the pro-life pulse. Sign up for their newsletter, find ways that you can make a difference, and how you can change hearts and minds with their pro-life apologetics course, pulseforlife.org. You know how much we love Anonymous beef at the Haynie house. It is delicious. It's wonderful quality. It's naturally raised with no steroids, antibiotics, and they just do what they do so well. High quality beef at the Anonymous farm. But did you know you can actually see where your beef comes from? You can visit Anonymous Farm. The fine folks, Dave and Mary Lynn, are the most hospitable folks I may have ever met. They'll let you feed a bottle calf and then meet the cows at Anonymous Farm. And opening soon is a special treat, Mulberry Cottage, for a stay at the Anonymous Farm. It's a family-oriented getaway, and they'll let you hike the trails out there. You can forage or bird watch or just enjoy the beautiful sunset from their porch. I'm very excited to check it out myself, and they'll even let you do a cookout with Anonymous beef. Order your beef or your next vacation at anonymousbeef.com. That's OHNEMUS beef.com. So glad you're with us on FaithWorks Live. If you've missed the start of the show, well, you'll just have to go back and get the podcast because I think James is hitting it out of the park today. James Fishback is our guest. We're talking about what on earth is happening at a time when we're supposed to be in this awesome bastion of freedom here in America. And I love it with all my heart. But I'm noticing that we're maybe a lot less free than we used to be because there's some things we can't say or you get, say it with me now, canceled. And we're no strangers to that on this platform. But what's happening in high schools and in colleges is students who are preparing arguments to the best of their ability to learn to present the most compelling cases and evidence for differing points of view on important issues of our time are being told point blank that if they argue for things like defense of America, that if they argue for capitalism, if they say the words illegal immigration or Mr. or Mrs. because it's gendered language, that they are automatically going to be losers, that they will not be tolerated because they're making the space unsafe. I mean, stop me if you've heard this kind of ridiculousness before. This is a microcosm, word of the day, for where we're going wrong in American society. And James is taking a step toward writing, a powerful step towards writing that. He's sounding the alarm bell about this, and I'll link to his excellent columns below at the Free Press. Millions of people now have viewed them and are considering these ideas, and well, we should. I mean, this has gone on long enough, James. I don't understand why we're not all up in arms a little bit more than we are about the practice of canceling any speech with which we disagree, because it incapacitates us from having the thoughts necessary to defend freedom, to understand, to articulate it, to appreciate it, and to defend it, which, maybe that's the point all along. I suppose I should ask you, what do you think is behind this push? And then how can we start to combat it effectively?
Absolutely. This wasn't going on when I was in high school 10 years ago, because the type of tribalism that is currently present in America was not anywhere near what it was back then. Think about it this way, Rebecca. An Axios Ipsos poll from a couple months ago pointed out that 70% of young Democrats would not be friends with a Republican, and 30% of Republicans would not be friends with a Democrat. Those numbers ought to be zero. And by the way, if you go back, rewind 20, 30 years, they were pretty darn close to zero. Whether you voted for Reagan or Mondale, Clinton or Perot, Bush, Gore, didn't matter. And then this guy named Trump comes down the escalator in 2015, and all of a sudden, who you vote for matters. I'll never forget, I've got a childhood friend, and in the 2020 election, she was talking with another friend about who they voted for. And the one friend said, I voted for Biden. And my friends didn't disclose who she voted for, refused to disclose, said, I'd rather not say. And for that act alone was canceled, ghosted, and that friendship was torn to shreds. Simply, again, for not disclosing who she voted for in a private election. So let's talk about this in the context of the National Speech and Debate Association. Trump comes along. He is vigorously labeled a fascist, a racist, a homophobe, a xenophobe, all of the words in the book. But not just that, his supporters are also labeled and ostracized the same exact way. The ideas are presented as an existential fight that if Trump wins, and then if he re-wins in 2020, that the country will fall apart, that homosexuals will be arrested, that African Americans will be put back in jail. I mean, this is not an exaggeration of what was said, the kind of rhetoric that was used. And look, you can have reasonable disagreements with President Trump about policies, and I do, and I'm sure you do, but to use that kind of language is just inappropriate. But here's what they did. They created a culture of fear. They created a culture of division. And ultimately, the ends justify the means for them. If the end is to stamp out the toxic ideology of conservatism as embraced by someone like Donald J. Trump, then the means to get to that end are irrelevant. Irrelevant. If it means canceling a 14-year-old girl for saying illegal immigration, if it means canceling a 60-year-old boy for referring to his colleague in a debate as Mr. Simmons instead of just Simmons, which is, of course, that subtly reinforces that sex, as we know, is binary, then we've got a really big problem on our hands. And then, so what I think happened, Rebecca, is the National Speech and Debate Association looked at that moment in time, whether it was the 2016 election, the so-called racial reckoning of 2020, and said, hold on a second. I know we all signed up to be a forum for ideas and a competition and debate and open and all of that stuff. But we've got young people and we've got this neo-fascist threat that risks tearing our democracy apart. We've got to do something about it. We've got to create safe spaces. So under the guise of inclusivity, using the tired euphemism of safety, they began to stamp out these ideas. They began to allow these judges to essentially say to kids, look, here's one judge who says, if you're white, don't run impacts that affect people of color. Those arguments belong to those communities. Why do they say that, Rebecca? Because an African-American student, a Hispanic-American student might feel unsafe in their mind if someone talks about, let's be honest, the rise of the single parent household in Black America, which has torn families apart, has resulted in unprecedented economic harm, to say nothing about the joy of having a two-parent household. I think that's the ultimate privilege, by the way, is the two-parent household, to be able, statistically that range true in terms of income and in wealth and in graduation rates and crime rates. But in all of the ways that our faith asks us to believe, we know the intangibles of a two-parent household are magical and are special. And that's why it's reinforced in every single way by our Christian faith. Those conversations would be unsafe. So they let the judges stamp it out, censor it, all in the name of safe spaces. And look, you don't get to have inclusivity when you are excluding certain ideas. You don't get to have a safe space and call it that and use that sugar-coated language to then stamp out ideas. Ideas, by the way, that millions, tens of millions of Americans agree with. I mean, if you polled the whole country and said, is Mr. or Miss violent language, your split would be something like 98-2. We're not talking about defending some radical, far right conservative idea here. And by the way, even then, there still ought to be a forum to do so. But listen to what this judge tells students, and this is a very cute and subtle way. He says to students before the round, I will not tolerate racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, xenophobic, ableist, or any argument that diminishes any person's humanity, because you will lose. Look, Rebecca, I think we can both agree that if a student is calling somebody names because of their race, because of their ethnicity, because of their disability, that is abhorrent. It has no place in high school debate. But notice he didn't just say behavior. He also said argument. Rebecca, what's a transphobic argument? What's a xenophobic argument? What on earth does that mean? Is a xenophobic argument one in which a young girl from Des Moines gets up there and says we ought to secure the southern border and stop the fentanyl from coming over that's killing 200 Americans every single day? Is it transphobic for a young boy from Baltimore to stand up and say that teenage girls cannot consent to life-altering, life-changing hysterectomies? Let's be clear about what this actually is. It is a cute, subtle, and ambiguous attempt to chill free speech in the name of protecting certain ideas. That is not debate in any way, shape, or form.
No, it shuts it down from the outset. And as you point out, it's now targeting people's opinions. It is convenient. It's ultimately quite convenient to say whatever I disagree with, I can call all of these epithets, and then it shuts down the debate. Then it's essentially like screaming fire, because we can't confront the opinion. We can't confront that argument on its own merits. And instead, all we have to do is lob an insult at it, and it's your atom bomb. Because immediately you're removed from that position to have to defend it, because all you have to do is call call Janie racist, and then she's not allowed to speak anymore. So that
Exactly.
works really well, doesn't it?
Right. On a day where, in a time where affirmative action was ruled by our Supreme Court as unconstitutional, of course, it violates the Equal Protection Clause. That's clear. Is it racist to say that race-based affirmative action is not good for America? Is that racist? Is it homophobic to say that Pride Month should be maybe scaled back a little bit, or that we should have bathrooms or sports on the basis of biological sex, not gender identity? And look, I'm an unapologetic conservative. I believe these things to be true, but I'm coming at this, Rebecca, not as a conservative who's defending the merit of his arguments. I'm coming at this as a conservative, as a free speech absolutist, a proud American, defending conservative arguments just because they ought to be included in this forum. Look, if you're a progressive student or a progressive judge, that's great. It's awesome to have you. Incubate Debate, my nonprofit, has just as many progressives as we do conservatives, and we're better off for it because it makes for a more challenging and competitive environment. But don't you want someone to challenge your ideas? Don't you want that conservative to stand up and say, hold on a second, maybe you're wrong about affirmative action? Doesn't that help you defend your views and challenge your convictions and walk away even a more persuasive speaker, right? What made Dr. King as persuasive, as cogent, as eloquent as he was the fact that when he roamed the streets of this country, when he walked and spoke to people, he wasn't just met with applause, he was met with pushback. And through that pushback, as abhorrent and as truly racist, by the way, to use that word, as racist as it was, he walked away with stronger convictions as a result. And that's what ultimately this is about, is that no matter where you are, conservative, progressive, wherever you are, having your ideas challenged is a good thing. Running different science experiments is a good thing. That's what this is ultimately about.
Mm-hmm. You asked that question rhetorically. I understand. I'm a little concerned if don't you want to have those ideas challenged? Don't you want to understand the strength of your own opinions or consider it from another point of view to allow the critic to buffet you so that you can become stronger, the true champion in the ring? I'm a little concerned about what that answer would be.
Yeah,
I don't know if
too.
people truly enjoy what debate was designed for, which is exactly what you're promoting.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So what do we do about this? What I know that your organization, Incubate Debate, is taking a much different approach, and it exists, I'm sure, to start to be that alternative to promote actual freedom, actual open dialogue and understanding for students to think critically, which is so key. That's a skill that must be, I think, recovered. That's on life support right now, the ability to critically think. And it's not just, don't let me forget to address your point that you've made, that even students' private speech is now considered fair game. And it's not just the speech that they're making in competitions as well. I don't want to neglect that. And that to me is just truly scary, that judges are apparently searching for the personal speech, like on social media, for example, of some of these students, and they're disqualifying them based on that.
That's exactly right. My second piece for my series in the Free Press is entitled "That High School Debates Watch What You Say." And it's not just watch what you say in the round, it's watch what you say in the weeks and months prior. Here's what happened to Matthew Adelstein. He was a senior in high school, did debate for 4 years. He went to the Tournament of Champions in April 2022. The debate topic was whether the U.S. should increase its protection of water resources. He was in favor of it. He went up there, gave his evidence, gave his reasoning, did a very good job. And then the opposing team went up there. And Rebecca, I am as serious as a heart attack. These were the words the opposing team uttered as their opening argument. Quote, "This debate is more than just about the debate. It's about protecting the individuals in the community from people who proliferate hatred and make this community unsafe." Matthew's jaw dropped. He had no idea what they were talking about. They quickly pulled up a screenshot of a tweet that Matthew had sent earlier that month that they deemed politically incorrect. And suddenly Matthew's 6-word tweet became the focus of the round. Forget water policy. Forget protecting this God-given resource. Let's talk about this kid's tweet at the Tournament of Champions. And here's the worst part. By the way, I don't fault these kids. Let these kids do whatever they want. If you want to go up there and play the violin and read poetry and drop some rap lyrics, you're free to do that. That's free speech.
You're giving them
That
ideas.
I know, that's free speech. But then what happens when you show up to a clarinet competition with a trombone? And that's exactly what happened here. They were supposed to play the clarinet, and here they come in having dug up dirt on Matthew Adelstein, having gone through his Twitter and throwing it in his face and actually hijacking what was supposed to be an educational debate about water policy and making it all about how he's a violent, homophobic racist. Here's the worst part. The judge, the adult in the room, the so-called adult in the room, gave the win to Matthew's opponents, who had declared a racist tirade against Matthew Adelstein over a tweet. Here's what the judge wrote to Matthew in his post-round feedback, and I'm quoting here again. A debate space where racist or violent people are not allowed is preferable to one where they are. He continues, the ballot, essentially his vote in that round, the ballot has a transformative power to challenge white debate norms where it is okay to just let racial or violent activity slide. Can you believe that?
How is that not racist?
Absolutely.
How is that by their own standard? Isn't targeting someone specifically because, or targeting rules? And that goes to your earlier point as well about labeling things that we don't like with inherently negative monikers, and then saying anything that issues that you are the problem because of the way you think and because of the way you vote, and therefore that makes you a racist, fascist, homophobic, bigot, et cetera, ad nauseum. But now anything that you speak or think is also targeted with that same, with those same epithets, with those same insults, and therefore cannot be allowed. My mind flashed back to, what was it, 2 years ago when Justin Trudeau was speaking, and he specifically targeted the people who disagreed with him about vaccines and vaccine mandates, and he says there's no space for those kind of people here. Right. It wasn't just, I disagree with those ideas, or I think you're wrong, or here's evidence to support my opinion. It was, we don't know what to do with these types of people. There's no room for your kind, essentially, here. And that is scary, in particular in a modern context when we've seen what the fruit of that type of true hatred and true marginalization can do. To target someone because of what they think or because of who they are. I thought we all decided that was unacceptable. I thought we decided that was the antithesis of freedom. And now we see people who claim to be on the side of including and making people safe, being inherently exclusionary towards anyone they disagree with for the most arbitrary reasons.
That's exactly right. And with, you can not take a view on the vaccine mandates or on the vaccine and side effects and still vigorously defend those individuals' rights to voice out their concerns. By the way, if the vaccine skeptics are such wackos, then they're going to be discredited within 5 or 10 minutes of the debate. And won't that just serve the ultimate purpose, which is to discredit them? I mean, this idea, we saw it, of course, recently with RFK and with Dr. Hotez, right? That he refused to debate even when over $1 million was on the line. And he refused to engage in a good faith conversation about vaccines, lockdown, mandates, so on and so forth. Look, if RFK, and we'll put our priors aside and whatever we feel about him, just put him in the corner over here for a second. If RFK is such a quack, and his ideas are so bankrupt, won't that become incredibly self-evident in just a matter of minutes in the debate? Won't it be so easy to beat him in an open conversation? It's kind of like the kid in middle school who swears he can do division in his head, but then when you ask him to divide 99 by 3 or whatever, he's like, no, not right now. I don't have to prove anything to you. I mean, we would laugh at that kid, rightly so, because he made a statement that he could do something. When he was pressed to do that thing that he just said he could do, he said he wouldn't do it. And so why do we not accept that in that case. But as a society, it seems like we increasingly accept the idea that some issues are just not up for debate.
Right. And it's worse than that because math is racist. And it's a construct of white heteronormativity and Western culture. And so we're not even allowed to have math class anymore. It's approaching that ridiculousness. And my attempt at humor and satire is almost always stymied because the world ends up being even more extreme than my jokes can make it out to be, which is kind of crazy. Now, James, let's talk about what you see as the remedy to this. Obviously, calling out this kind of hypocrisy, this kind of malfeasance, I would say, on the part of people who are supposed to be contributing to the education of these students and allowing them to have this educational experience, and instead shutting them down and promoting dangerous ideology. And I say that because it is inherently against critical thought. What would be the remedy to something like this?
The remedy is to first acknowledge that the institutions in question cannot be reformed. They have to be abandoned. We
Okay.
have to create the same capitalism that the NSDA and its judges denounce and decry. We have to use to create competing parallel institutions. I've done that, I think, with Incubate Debate in Florida. We're the fastest growing debate league in the country. We are completely no cost. We are completely free speech. And just look at the students who do well. Progressive will win one tournament, a conservative will win the other, an apolitical kid will win the next, and so on and so forth. So what we have to do is say, we are not going to play this game. We're not going to play rigged games, which are inherently unfair, where we stand to lose time and again. And what I would say to anybody is, if you're a former debate coach or a debater, stand something up in your community, even if it's small, even if it doesn't have prestige. Bring 10, 15 kids together on a Saturday and have a real debate, because that will be so much more meaningful than playing their games and going after their trophies and their medals, which mean absolutely nothing. Debate used to be characterized by disagreement, by challenging viewpoints. And now it seems like the children in debate are simply repeating after the adults and conforming to their ideology. That's not debate at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree that it's important to create an alternative, because sometimes I see even dear friends that are on the conservative side of the spectrum, they start adopting those same rules because they say the game is rigged. And so I mean, no matter what, all of this can be done respectfully. It can be done passionately and yet respectfully. So I think it is up to us to maintain that standard, to hold unswervingly to the freedom of speech, to do so with the strength, with the boldness, with all of the evidence that we can bring to bear, and yet not seek to cancel our opponents in that same way. I think we have to be able to transcend that. That's really difficult when you're being called every name in the book, but I think that's why your approach is so fascinating. And I do think that it presents viable alternatives, successful alternatives, so that we can actually have freedom of speech. Because I think there will be a cry for that. I think the generation that we have that's coming up, that has been starved of actual thought, of challenging themselves and going into any depth about what they believe, they're looking for alternatives. And I don't know, I'm hoping and praying that that's going to be the new rebellion, that we're going to see a whole host of rebels with a cause that believe in the virtue of the white picket fence and the American dream, and saying, you know what, we ought to have this kind of freedom. We ought to be friends with our neighbors, and we ought to be able to be honest about where we disagree and why. And who knows, maybe we can walk away better for it. I don't know. Maybe I'm just Pollyanna over here, but that's what I'd love to see.
I'd love to see it as well. I know we can get back there. I know it because I've seen it. I've seen the division in young students on the ground visiting schools all over my state, rural, urban counties that went 80% for Trump, counties that went 55%, 60% for Biden. Here's what I can tell you. The division is so easily fixed by simply having open debate and dialogue. The moment that students have to defend some of their firmest convictions, their most radical convictions, and yet can't do that, is the moment we start to heal as a nation. And I think both sides are guilty of that, that we've really got to just say, okay, if you believe something to be true and you can't defend it, then you can't believe it. It's that simple. It's that simple. And, I would have loved, and I think there's, of course, vehemently disagree with the idea that America is systemically racist. I do think that there are racist people in this country. They're a very, very, very small minority. But the best way to deal with someone like that isn't to cancel them, but is to have an honest conversation, right? The path to truth runs through free speech and open dialogue. And why do you feel that way? What maybe happened in your life that's leading you to come up with this and to justify this irrational, right? So let's have that conversation. I think we can definitely think about it that way. That's how we come together as a nation. That's how we bring unity, is being able to talk about things. When we look back at the pandemic and all the mistakes that were made, to say that we cannot have a debate about this and everything that went wrong is an insult to everybody who had to put up with this nonsense for 3 years.
Right. And it's the most dangerous side effect that I think is still lingering, is our inability to talk about things, our tendency to want to shut down and drown out the voices that we might think are disagreeing or dangerous or even just, out there. Why not have more speech? I don't think the solution is to silence speech. I think we need to have more and better speech.
That's right. That's exactly right. That is exactly right.
James Fishback has been our excellent guest today. Check out his work at Incubate Debate. He's based in Florida, and we're here in Des Moines, and I hear some good speech and debate concepts have originated from Des Moines. So how about we set something up here? I'd love to see that happen. And even just that as a challenge to anyone listening out there. If you care about critical thought in our country, care about the future of free speech in our nation, collect yourself, some kids, some adults that care, that can volunteer their time and set something like this up. Why couldn't we? I think this is a wonderful concept and a great idea. And it might just be, even just from humble beginnings, the future of free speech in America. I'd love to see it. Love the vision. James, thank you so much for your time, for your considered insights, for sounding the alarm bell, for standing strong for free speech and taking what you've learned and helping to encourage other kids, to lift them up and to help them achieve this skill, to help them realize that in themselves and give them those opportunities as well.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And you're absolutely right. This is just do it kind of thing, right? I think if you look at the world and say, well, I can't be the National Speech and Debate Association, I can't have 6,000 kids at a giant convention center, it's the wrong way to think about it. Right. I think our faith tells us to just take the leap, even if it is small, to take things in steps and bring people together, have these conversations, listen, speak, and unify. That's how we're going to bring this great country of ours together. Absolutely. James Fishback, check out the link below. I'll link to his articles on the Free Press and also to their website, Incubate Debate. Great to have you, brother. Thanks so much. It's my pleasure, Rebecca. Thank you. And thank you for listening to Faith Works Live. If you enjoyed this conversation and you want to pass it on to a friend, we would love that. Let me know what you think, the questions I should have asked, because sometimes I make mistakes too, and I'd be happy to take notes. Always learning over here. So glad that you're listening, and you can hear us podcast-wise in all the usual online places. Again, YouTube if we haven't been canceled yet, but Spotify, iTunes, iHeart, and everywhere else by God's grace. Thank you for listening. We have a mission. So let's be about it. What is that vision? Glad you asked. It's to love God, serve people, and live free. This is Faith Works Live. When a woman faces an unplanned pregnancy, every possible emotion goes through her head. Where can she go for help and for hope? She can go to InnerVisions. Here in our metro, we have 2 healthcare clinics where she will find hope and help. From free pregnancy testing and STD testing to free ultrasounds, InnerVision serves women and men with STDs who find themselves in vulnerable situations. They're completely free of charge because of generous donations from folks like you. And their medical clinics help their patients get all the information that they deserve, that empowers them to make life-affirming decisions. That's what they do at InnerVisions Healthcare Clinics right here in Des Moines. Learn more at innervisionshealthcare.org. That's innervisionshealthcare.org. And you can call 24 hours a day at 515-440-CARE. That's 515-440-2273.